I'm not going to say anything in this breakout that is like revolutionary. All right. It's just like, oh my God, it's going to change everything. Like we're just supposed to be reminded in these things that college ministry in particular is such a multifaceted ministry with so many different moving parts. And I think sometimes it's just like, maybe we're focused over here and that's really good, but how do we get focused over here? And maybe in your season, that's kind of where you're at, is like, how do we focus in on a different area? And I think all of us at some point, whether you've been in college ministry a long time, you've been in church ministry forever, whatever your story is, I think one of the things that we face often is like, we can maybe get people in the door and we can get them plugged in, but when they hit senior year, like senioritis is real. It was real in high school and it's real in college. And you'll see 3 years of faithful service and they get that last year or 5 years, whatever their pathway is, and then it's like falling off. And so our hope here is maybe just to give you some tools and traits. I don't want to say, I'm not going to say anything, like I said, it's revolutionary, but just a kind of a reminder. And so I think let's make the assumption today that all of us like want to get to this place where we don't want to see our seniors just fall off, right? I think we all have the story of the kid who was coming faithfully. Something happened, and then they've deconstructed or they've just walked away or they're nominal in their Christian walk. And like, how do we as a ministry faithfully bring people not to an event, not to a gathering, but to shepherd them all the way through so they see themselves intentionally sent. So let's pray and then we'll jump in. Father, grateful for today. Thankful for this time, these men and women in this room. God, will you use today to maybe just get something in our minds that we can take back to the places where we have influence and the people and the places, God, that we would see our men and women in our ministry as those who are sent from us. And so, God, will you do that in Jesus' name? Amen. Amen. I always struggle with things like this because I don't want to stand up here and tell you what we do. I'm going to hopefully give you some principles, maybe some examples. Every context is different. And so if I run through what we do, it's not going to be really hard for you to duplicate that in your place. So I hope we can just come around the principles of how do we craft our seniors and how do we intentionally go from beginning to end? Because if we're like they're seniors and we're trying to figure out how to send them, I think we've already missed the mark. And so we're going to scale it all the way back to freshmen, to pipeline, to vision. And then at the end of this go, hey, here's how we help them flourish both in where they are now and then when they get sent. Lubbock is a very transient city. People don't come and stay there a long time. It's like, hey, tech is there. And tech is there, right? We had a discussion with some church consultants, and we send. We love sending. It's really hard though. We're like, hey, with a staff our size, like how many people should be staying? And they were like, all right, I think we had like 48 people on staff at that time in our church, and they're like, 7 to 8 are going to be stayers. Like everybody else is just going to be sent. So that's on our mind all the time, is how do we send them well, knowing that the majority of these are going to go get a job somewhere else in a cooler city with a lot better scenery than the haboob dust storm of Lubbock. And so it's kind of where I want to go. If you have your Bible, turn to Ephesians chapter 4. And if somebody would be willing to read Ephesians 4, 11 through 16, I'd really appreciate that. All right, thank you.
Ephesians 4, 11
through 16.
And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love.
Man, that verse just is like an engine for, I think, ministry. What are some things that you see in that verse that just stick out to you?
The whole passage. I mean, verse 12, the equipping of the saints for to work and serve.
Yeah.
And building up the body of Christ.
Yeah.
That's what we're supposed to do with.
So good, man. So good. What else?
I think verse 14 where it talks about not being tossed to and fro with the different doctrines, different phases of culture.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, one more.
Growth to maturity.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we kind of scale back in this passage to a church that was really like on the front and center of the cultural war, right? Like Ephesus was a super influential city in the ancient world. And that city isn't unlike the college campus that we're at today. It was a thriving, huge library, big amphitheater. Like they were on the front of a cultural war, or whatever you want to say it. Like they were cultural ideas and everything. And I feel like this is kind of where our students are, right? Like the college campus is that place now where culture is they are on the front lines. It's always turning. They're kind of looking every which way as to what culture is saying is acceptable. And Paul's going to remind us and them, hey, here's the job of the church in the midst of that. The job of the church is not to execute, though we will. The main job of the church is not to put on a show, though sometimes it gets really hard, right? Or to put on events or to do, get a bunch of pizza and gather people, whatever. Like the job of the church is to equip the saints unto the work of ministry. Like that's a purposeful thing so that when the next phase of life and that young adulthood is coming for them, that they aren't tossed to and fro when they leave. And so this has got to drive us into this. So here's 3 parts that we're going to look at today. I'm old school, so I do have a slide deck. I didn't say PowerPoint, right? Even though I am 40 and that's what I was told yesterday by Jesse. That wasn't cool. So my slide deck, but I don't have any place to play it. So our first part today is we're going to talk about vision. The second, we're going to talk about intentional pipeline. Oh, I'm sorry. I am a terrible writer. And then lastly, we're going to talk about flourishing. So if you're looking at 3 different parts here, we're going to talk about vision, we're going to talk about intentional pipeline, and we're going to talk about flourishing. So it's kind of where we want to head today. If we're to be a healthy church that produces a healthy culture, then we believe that we've got to be kingdom-minded and not church-centric, right? So we've got to think about the broader spectrum of the kingdom, though our ministries are very important and our churches are there because either we're employed by those things or that's where we're members at or whatever it may be. We're drawn to those things. The kingdom can't be church-centric. And so the goal is not to build up walls in your church, but rather to create a kingdom-focused ministry that's that is actually pushing back what's dark on the campus. So when we talk about vision, our vision in particular is this. We want to build a culture of intentional discipleship and prioritize biblical literacy. So our goal is intentional discipleship, biblical literacy, and so we're going to commit to recruiting and discipling college students to those ends. And when we are talking to whether they've just come to faith, or whether they're coming and they're just checking out what this Jesus thing is all about. We live in the Bible Belt, so most kids have some sort of semblance of church. Most wild out their freshman year and then are like, yeah, that didn't fulfill. I'm going to try church now. So wherever that may be, like we want to cast this massive vision that the next generation of missionaries, church planners, faithful followers of Jesus, that's who they are. They're not just here for me to boost my numbers. They're not just here for me to have a cool ministry so I get to go to conferences. Like they're here to be sent. And so we hope through our efforts and through what God is doing in us, we hope to plant a church every year in a college town. Now and we'll talk about why we do that with seniors in particular, and to send 40 goers in the next 5 years to the unreached people group. So we have this vision for what we want to see in our church, and God's blessed us from the day we were planted in 2008 that there were 400 people on the first day, and about 378 of them were college students. It's like we had a good congregation that gave like 4 cents, right? So, and since then, that's kind of been the way. And so we've always had like this beauty of college students coming and being engaged. And in the last several years, it's like, okay, how do we leverage this? I don't know why we got momentum with college students. I don't know why they're coming, but they continue to show up. How do we leverage them for something greater than just our metric spreadsheet that we put it in? And so we started thinking through like, all right, we want to leverage the most mobile generation to go to the ends of the earth, to go to places where the gospel isn't known. And so our vision continues to thrive that. In fact, like the urgency that all of us should feel in this room is like, listen, in every year, there will be 1 million college students that will walk away from the faith, that grew up in church, that will walk away from the faith. Like they'll come to college, or they'll be right after college, and they will walk away. And when we saw that stat yesterday, that 95% of people make this decision to follow Christ before the age of 30. Like we're right in that. In fact, the oldest millennial is now 40, and the oldest Gen Zer is now 20. Like we're right in that sweet spot of how do we cast massive vision for these people. And so when we talk about college-focused multiplication, like we want to laser everything into our time and our energy to reach this generation and reach the missional need. This is the vision that we want to have for our students, is that you're part of a bigger story than this. The college campus is, and I believe this, and this is why we're here, and this is what I hope you hear. It is the greatest mission field that we, and with the most highly potential influencers that we can be a part of. If we're to talk domestic mission field, this is where we want to be. And we want to leverage that unique season to that end. So when we talk about sending seniors, it doesn't start when they're a senior casting vision for that. It starts when they roll in your door after you've just reached them as a freshman to begin to cast vision for what they are. So here's the 3 principles that I want you to take away today when we talk about vision. The first one is this: keep the why at the forefront. Keep the why at the forefront. Vision leaks, culture drips, and it comes slowly and surely. And what begins to happen is that you can have a great vision. Like, I pray your summer is slow, it's really fruitful, and it gives you a chance just to think, because you're just kind of going through the whole semester. And then you can just step back and go, hey, why are we doing the things that we're doing? Like the exercise we did yesterday in the geographical cohorts was super helpful for us. Because like, where are we just spinning our wheels? Where's the why just become down to, oh, we just do that thing. We just do that, and it's not really producing any fruit, but we just do it because we've always done it. So keep the why at the forefront. Your fuel, your vision is being, or your culture is being fueled by your vision. So assess your value. Like, what are the values that you're at? What do you talk about internally, not externally? What are the conversations within your own church and within your own ministry? What do you envision as a church? We'll talk in a minute about the multi-generational body and how important I think that is to this sending culture and sending your seniors. But what do you envision as a church? Where do you want to be? Because the culture that you create within your leadership and the way you keep that within the people who are, whether you're a student leader, whether you're on staff, whether you're part of a bigger staff and you just kind of help out, that vision will lead and trickle from your leadership to your students. You talk and you dream about changes. And then the second thing is you just don't want to be a college ministry that's just running from event to event without assessing the ends of those events, right? We don't want to just run from thing to thing, because then what happens is if you're just gathering students for the sake of gathering for an event with no real purpose to the end of the value and the vision, then what you're going to have is a bunch of loosely affiliated students who come in when there's something cool or when there's free food, right? That's usually when our students, a lot of our, like, hey, we're going to give you free food. Oh, I'm there. That's great. That's a good bit. But if the vision isn't clear from that point, then there's going to be kind of loosely affiliated. In Lubbock, this is just kind of a cultural thing for us, but everybody goes to church in Lubbock. And by that, they mean Easter and Christmas. Oh yeah, I'm involved at Redeemer. You're like, really? That's interesting. I saw you at Easter. And it's just kind of a cultural thing. And what we want to break down is, what does that mean to be involved in and be a part of this vision? The second thing, so we keep the why at the front. The second thing is we want to know that culture is learned. Culture is learned. So if we have the vision at the front, culture is going to take time to be learned. This is what you talk about and celebrate externally. So you have an internal dialogue where you want to keep the vision at the front of everything that you do. So if you're having staff meetings, if you're having leadership discussions, you're training leaders, you're keeping that at the front, then what do you talk about externally? So if we're to create a sending culture for our seniors, what are you talking about from the stage? What are you talking about in small groups? What are you talking about at your events? What are you celebrating? Like, what stories are you telling? What are you abstaining from for the sake of the vision? We know that we can't do everything, right? Like, we have tried and failed on so many things and said, let's just pare down what we're doing to be about this. And everything that we do has this vision in mind of equipping students, of connecting, equipping, and sending our students. So if we're continuing to talk about that, like, the foundation of your culture is going to be built day in and day out. So what are you talking about externally? What are you seeking for your church? And listen, this is a church-wide culture thing. And I know some of you guys are coming from places where you have a college ministry, and it's kind of like that black sheep that's kind of over there, and they're like, I really don't know what they do, but they're there. And the church-wide isn't celebrating those stories. Like, I'd encourage you in the most gentle way with submission to leadership and gentleness leadership is talk about how can we tell the stories of what God is doing in our ministry. We are blessed to have a lead pastor who was a college minister when he planted and understands the beauty of that and understands the joy in college ministry. And what is so good about that is he wants to celebrate those stories as well. And so from the stage, we talk about it, like he'll send out a Slack and be like, hey, what stories are happening in college ministry that I can bring into this sermon? This is a church-wide thing. It can't just be a college thing. We don't want siloed ministries when we talk about learning culture. Okay, we want to create that vision. Thirdly is what is the vision that you're creating that is going to attract, because that's part of it. We want to bring students in. But secondly, that retains and strengthens your people. So thirdly, you're creating a vision that attracts, retains, and strengthens. So 3 aspects of that vision as you think about it is attracting. What's bringing those students in? Because what brings them in is what you're going to have to do to hold them there. What is retaining those students? How are you caring for and shepherding those? And how are you strengthening them to the end of being sent? Students, listen, I found this often because I think it's just true of humanity. We want to be wrapped up in a story bigger than us, right? Like, we want to find ourselves wrapped up in a story bigger. So what are we focusing on? What story, again, are you telling? We say we want to partner. Our mission statement is we want to partner with God to create lifelong faithful followers of Jesus. Like, that's our mission. When I move off of that mission, like, things get really anxious for me. And I start doing weird things with my mind and with my thought, and I become a micromanager, and I get freaked out, and like, I'm not healthy when I'm in those places. But when I'm going, okay, here's my goal: faithful, lifelong follower of Jesus. That is my end goal. Then it helps me kill stuff that needs to die so that I can fuel that. And here's how we're going to do that. We're going to connect students to the gospel and to each other. We want them to know the gospel. So we have a weekly gathering Tuesday nights. We're going to gather. It is our big front door. We're going to preach the gospel every single week. We're going to make sure that it is explicit and heard. And we're going to walk through the scriptures. And I am not creative, so I don't have cool names for, our 1 Timothy series was 1 Timothy, right? 2,000 years it's been good. I think it'll be good today. Like, we want to make sure that we are putting the gospel, and then we want to make sure they're connecting with other people. So if we're going to send them, we got to draw them and retain them. So we're going to make sure our leaders are in the lobby with their eyes up on ministry. Secondly, we want to equip them. So if we're going to make faithful followers of Jesus that are living lives that matter, we're going to connect them, and then we're going to equip them with the things. Because we know there are going to be students who won't know the gospel, but how do we encourage them in the gospel? There are going to be students who are going to be like those theological heady nerds that are just ready to take the war to everybody who doesn't believe like they are. We were all there at one point, I think. How do we equip them with gentleness and the ability to teach and care for? How are we equipping them? And then ultimately, how are we sending them? How are we going to send them? What are we going to do? We want to wrap them up in the story. And then our fourth principle is that this is maybe just more of a personal thing. Multiplication is like pruning a tree. Multiplication is hard, but it starts in your ministry. If you want to see multiplicative moves of the gospel, it's not going to start when they leave your ministry. It's going to start inside your ministry. When we talk about sending seniors, sending will create health within your ministry. When you prune a tree the correct way, that tree is healthier. It's the same way with your ministry. When you are seeing multiplication as the mindset, that these are mine for a season, I am to care for them and send them. How do you talk about multiplication? So when we look at our gospel communities or our small groups, they're student-led. We looked at our gospel and said, hey, there's 40 students coming to a GC. And that was like as big as a church I used to pastor, right? And I'm asking a 21-year-old kid to shepherd a church, basically. When we said, okay, that may not be the best thing for multiplication, it may not be the best thing for connection, and certainly isn't for equipping, because I can come to a 40-person GC, just roll in and roll out without ever meeting anybody. It wasn't serving the purpose. So when we talk about multiplication, it's like, hey, when your GC gets to 12 or 15, we're gonna multiply it. We're gonna plant a new GC. We're going to take the leaders that are in that, we're going to plant another one, and it's gone great in some occasions, and we've had to fold other ones. But I'd rather try that to make sure that students are seeing the vision and keeping that at the front than just go, hey man, you got 40 students coming. That's awesome. Way to go. Your host homes have to push back couches and make bigger dinners, and like that's awesome. I want them to be connected and equipped well. And so that's what we're going to do. So if we've seen these intentional efforts from the inside that are inviting students here, the second thing is, okay, this intentional pipeline, that getting to sending is not going to happen just by talking about it. It's not just going to happen by us casting big vision in our staff meetings. We're actually going to have to know where our students are going, and they're going to have to know where they're going. So what does your pipeline look like? So here's what I want you to, I'm going to pass these out really quickly. If you'll just take one and kind of pass those around. We're going to do an exercise here in a second after I get through this one. Maybe give you some time just to think really quickly. When we talk about our pipeline, this is the aspect that we want our students to be caught up in, that we're moving them towards something. It's been amazing to hear some of our seniors that have come out of it, that have entered into our residency program and have said, that I was there and then there and then there, and now I'm here. That's all intentional. I guess it's something we want you to see. We want them to be moving that. And so how do we get those students that aren't connected, that are loosely affiliated, into this pipeline and see them sent? When we look at this line of leadership, we say that our best people have fallen into this. And we look at a class of, I think we had like 36 or something that were seniors this year, which is just awesome for us to think about. But when I look back at those seniors, I'm like, those were some of the culture changers for us that just bought in and now are going out. So leadership is the first one. We believe in a student-led, staff-supported leadership. So when we talk about pipeline, leadership matters. Leadership matters. That when we look at what it means, that we're going to be very intentional about raising up and training leaders to raise up and train leaders. So when we talk about pipeline, we're not talking about leadership for the sake of leadership. We're not talking about power for the sake of power. Like everybody kind of wants that. What we're talking to our leaders about is your job is to raise up other leaders. So when we look at that, I'll hand this one out to you. This is kind of what our pipeline looks like. And so this is the other one, that what we try to intentionally do and the ways that we do this. This is not new to us. Man, Salt Company is a great friend of ours. We love them. We stole a lot of crap from them, all right? So it's just like repurpose it for what we can. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. But when we talk about levels of leadership, we look at our context leaders, which are this low level of just, hey, I love Jesus. I just want to serve. I just want to grow in leadership. And they come in, our context leaders are just there to engage and enjoy conversation, to be inviters and outreach and equippers. And then they move into GC leadership. And so that means they go from just kind of serving the GC, maybe leading a breakout discussion within the GC, to actually then taking some ownership over our gospel community. Is that they own those parts of our gospel community that are, hey, I'm leading the discussion, I'm organizing the group me, I'm doing the outreach events. Like they are we want them to grow in that leadership. And then if there are certain level of leaders that are like, hey, what does ministry look like for us? We move them into our senior team. And that's like, hey, I'm exploring what it would mean. And they have care. They've led a GC. They've got care over GCs. So they're moving up this realm where it isn't just about them getting to their senior year and then punting on their responsibilities. But now those seniors are driven to go, how do I care for the leaders who are in those positions? How do I care for them well? And then we get to residency and all that stuff, which I don't have time to talk about today. If you ever want to know more about residency, Jesse is sitting right there. Jesse's our associate residency director, so you can talk to him. I needed friends in this, so I told him to say, come here, man. So when we look at leadership, though, and how we want to keep our seniors tethered to the ministry, is our student leaders become our main recruiters. Like I walked in this year to our leadership, and we have a class called H3, which is just what does it mean to serve within Redeemer College. And I walked into that, and I looked around, and I was like, I know like 4 people in this room of however many. Which was incredible because what it told me was our leaders were the ones seeing in their GCs people and going, hey, why don't you come? Why don't you invite you in? Now, when they're in this place, listen, you see this stuff, this vision starting to like take root in them. Now they've got vested interest because that person that they invited or were sharing the gospel with on campus that's been coming to a GC, now they've invited them into leadership and they've got skin in the game now. That's my person. I knew them. I knew Miguel when he didn't know Jesus. And now Miguel knows Jesus. And now Miguel's going to be serving in a GC next year. I'll stick around and watch what Miguel's going to do. Because my job's not done sharing the gospel with him. My job's not done leading and shepherding and caring for. They're getting caught up in a story that's bigger than just, hey, come to my event. It's now a person who's heard the gospel and the gospel has changed them and they've got to see that. So we want students to be on the front lines of that when we talk about leadership. The second part of our pipeline here is the equipping portion. We want to equip. We want to provide opportunities for them to grow in understanding and knowledge of the gospel. If students are the most strategic mission force on the planet, they're mobile, they dwell on the front lines of culture and spiritual war. Therefore, it's going to be these men and women that need to be equipped to what they've been called for. If we're to go back to Ephesians for the equipping of the saints unto the work of ministry, then my job becomes how do I prepare them to be caught up in the story that's bigger than them? How do I prepare them? How do I get them into this? And so there are 3 aspects of equipping for us. The first one is discipleship. I know, revolutionary, right? Like just off the chain. It's just discipleship. We want them as leaders within this pipeline that are going to eventually be doing this with others, is that we want them to know personal discipleship first and foremost. We want them to know they need Jesus more than anything. That they need the gospel with them, that they need their affection stirred, that they need to be aware of their own deep need and deep sin. And so when we look at faithful followers of Jesus, like this is our shirt, these are our axioms. Like, we want this to produce a faithful follower of Jesus. We want them to live in the light. That 99% in the light is still in the dark, right? You can be 99% known and completely unknown, right? Because that 1%. We say, hey, as a follower of Jesus, you get to live in the light. You get to live because your sin's been taken away. So we want them to recognize that. We want them to partner with, right? No, we say this one with little pinkies here, no one sits alone, no one stands alone. That we want them to see people as people and not just a project. So if I see somebody sitting by themselves, our leaders are going to go, oh man, I got vested interest in this thing. It keeps them tethered, right? This is stuff that isn't going to be, this is stuff that's not going to change when they leave our ministry. So we celebrate always, want to celebrate stories of what God's doing, both in them and around. We want them to be faithful over impressive, that rather than, we want them to have deep roots, more than we just want a beautiful plant that goes inch deep. We want them to be deep. And then we want them to know that prayer is how we're going to wage war in everything. And so when we look at our axioms, like, we want to equip them in those things. We want them then to understand if our students are in this and we're going to send them well, we want them to be discipled personally. And then secondly, we want them to then disciple. So we talk about multiplication focus. That what happens so often in our ministries, and I think Dean kind of alluded to it last night, which was really convicting and encouraging, is like what happens so often is that gospel terminates on us. What God is doing terminates on me. I can be walking Jesus and going great, and it just kind of sits with me. We want more Bible studies. Like, people who leave, like, it is so true what he said last night. People rarely leave Redeemer because, it's like, God, they're too mission focused. It was like, we didn't do no Bible studies, sermons are too short, there's only a 15-minute turnaround between services, like, it's too big, whatever it may be, like, whatever the excuses are. And we want them to see that, hey, as a student, as you're growing through freshman, sophomore, junior, all the way through, that, man, that gospel that took root in you doesn't terminate on you, that you're going to go find those. So we do this little thing called grow groups. They're like groups of 2 or 3 that get together and just read the Bible together, whether that's peer-to-peer, like, peer-to-peer, just encouragement and accountability, or whether that's like, hey, I've got friends who don't know the gospel, and it's like, hey, why don't you just come read the Bible with me? Whatever that is, we want them to breathe out what is happening to them. We want them to breathe out because, again, we want them to be seen as sent, not just when they're up on the screen for commissioning night, but all throughout their journey, that they are being sent. That they're being sent to the campus. That multiplication bleeds into outreach. That bleeds into being sent to their campus and their community with anticipation and engagement in spiritual conversations. So if they're going to multiply, they're going to go to their friends within the ministry, yes, but we also want to put them on campus. That you're in your classroom for a purpose. That you're there for a reason. We don't want you to be spiritual gluttons. One of the verses that changed my perspective was Psalm 23. He'll lay them down in green pastures, right? And I used to, from my American mindset, was like, oh, green pasture, knee high, alfalfa, green. I can just lay down, I don't even have to move. It's just like food all around. And then I watched this video of this guy in Israel, and he's saying, hey, he's teaching through Psalm 23, and he shows this like just rocky terrain of a desert. And I'm like, that's awesome, but you're talking through like Psalm 23, man. I don't know what's going on here. And he would come up and the camera would pan on these big, huge, like clumps of grass that were just kind of sporadic throughout the landscape. And he's like, to a shepherd, this would have been a green pasture. And the shepherd would have led the sheep to just enough, to just enough, to just enough, where they kept moving, they kept being fed. And that's what we want to see with our students, is that when they're outreach, that it doesn't just become spiritual gluttony, that they got saved and then just sit in the church and just consume, but that consuming sees them as sent out. And so I think these are the things that I want you to think about here for the next maybe 5 minutes, because I want to give us some time to dialogue at the end. But look at that pipeline, and maybe with your team, if you're here with a team or just by yourself, like, look at the blank one. Don't look at mine. Maybe that will someday be a great thing for you. I'm not your ministry, you're not mine, but look at yours, and maybe if that's helpful, where do you see some of these things happening in your ministry? Where are some of these intentionalities and how you're raising up and dripping vision of people being sent and equipped? Okay, so let's take a few minutes to do that. I wish I had some cool like worship music to play, but I don't. Jesse, you want to sing for us?
I think we do somewhat. I feel like maybe there's some what we do what was it, the tryouts. What'd you call your students? Grow groups?
Grow groups. Those are like our discipleship, like really intense.
Gotcha.
Not intense, I say that. Just like smaller. That's better. It's better. All right, I'm late on my B reel, but I'll get to be in it.
I think one of the things that we did, because you know the path is like, they do like try to like half the vision, and like, I didn't know what it was. We were able to that section, and we're like, channels, that, so, I don't know, I think that's cool, but I think I'm going to use something, it's not just,
Oh, yeah, I know. I just saw that.
Like, actually,
Yeah.
it's like, if there's anything, are they able to, like, be able to,
Hey. All right, so I know we're not like even farther along that thing, but I want to land the plane here in the next 5 or 7 minutes or so, and then just if we have any dialogue or questions. Again, I can't encourage you enough in these times that consume what you can and talk to everybody that you can. You can learn and take these things home, and I think that's why we get to springboard into summer, is that we just kind of get to dialogue and wrestle through these things. And it may not be massive changes. I would encourage you, don't go back to your home church and be like, we got to blow it all up, okay? Because what you're doing is good. There may just be some tweaking that needs to be done. And there may just be like, oh, maybe this one aspect really stuck out to me. And so be encouraged in that. So when we talk intentional pipeline, maybe you guys can start seeing how you actually do that. And is it, hey, we're doing this internally and we understand how we do this. Does anybody else get this? Maybe that's the step. It's like, how do we bring our student leaders into this? We're already doing it. Maybe it's just about communication at that point. Or, hey, we need to be a little bit more intentional with outreach. Maybe we need to equip how do we do that? How do we get caught up in the bigger story of the church? So intentional pipeline is the second way. And then lastly is flourishing. How do we create flourishing for them both here and now in this moment that helps them flourish after college? So my buddy Justin Smith, he'll be teaching a session this afternoon on preaching to Gen Z. I'd really encourage you to go hear him. They are playing a church in Austin right now. He'd always say this. I'd ask him about young adult ministry. It's like a hole in our church, just like this gap for us. And he would always say, yeah, have a good young adult ministry, you gotta have a crappy college ministry. And I was like, well, is there a way to do both? Is there a way that we can have a great college ministry that spurs on into a good young adult ministry? And so I hope this last part is that hope is flourishing. Is that in the here and now, the right now, here's what we want to see from our students. When we want to see them flourish right now, is we want them to buy into the local church. I am unapologetically, there it is, passionate about the local church. It is God's mechanism for 2,000 years to see the growth of the gospel go forth. I don't know why he did it, but that's what he chose. And so we want this to be a church-wide flourishing. So when we want our students to look for places where they can actively serve and areas where they can preach the gospel in the local church. So in Redeemer College, if that's getting plugged into this pipeline here for somebody who's just coming along, if we're going to send them well, they're not just ultimately, when they graduate, going to start sharing the gospel. Oh, I graduated, now I'm just going to start doing it. We want to prepare them while they're in the beauty of having a safety net and the beauty of having equipping and instruction where they're known and they can be known. So we want to disciple them. We want them to look for places in our kids ministry. Our kids ministry loves college students. Our college students love serving in children's ministry. I'll give you a story of one senior who just graduated. He's one of those culture changers for us. His name is Jack. And Jack's been a GC leader for us for 2 years, which is kind of rare, but faithful just 2 years in a row to lead a GC. He's a monster in discipleship. I probably had 4 new leadership meetings with guys I was like, hey, why are you applying for leadership? And like, Jack Nelson saw something in me. And he's unassuming dude. He's going to go write code for some, company that does like car online sales. Like that's what his job's going to be. But he saw himself as that. And as he's being sent, it's like, not when I'm graduating, but right now. And he, for the last 2 years, has been serving in the first grade classroom. There's this 21, 22-year-old dude who's like, I know where I want to be an all-in church member, is I'm going to be in the children's classroom. My daughter gets to benefit from that. She loves Jack. But Jack's like, this is where I want to be. So he's like, helping with 4th and 5th grade gathering. I'm like, to me, that's not my area. But he's found that place to go and serve and to breathe this stuff out and to be sent, even within the local church. Student ministry. Like student ministry, we're so closely aligned. Am I pushing my college students to be involved in the lives of our students when they're making those choices that some of our college students have probably made and are just a few years ahead? Maybe not wiser, just lived a little bit longer. And so where are you pushing your students? And so we have these 3 areas that we talk about when we are sending our students. We are very clear about this. And I would hope that our seniors would see this, that anyone could see where we want to send them. The first is that we want to send them as faithful, as all-in church members. That this will be the majority of your students. The majority of your students, that when they hear that you are sent, every week at college gathering, every week on a Sunday morning, our last phrases to our people is, Redeemer, you are sent. You're sent to your spheres of influence, but this last time we have a commissioning night, last Tuesday gathering for our college students. And it's the last time that I get to say to some of those seniors, you're sent. And for them, that means I'm an all-in church member. So wherever I'm going to get a job, I've bought into local church in college. I haven't just used it and kind of floated in. These things have created in me buy-in. I want to go do that. I want to replicate that somewhere else. So most of our students are going to say, you know what? I'm going to move back to Dallas. I'm going to move to Houston. I'm going to move somewhere. I'm going to get a job, and I'm going to find a church that I can plug into, that they are being sent just as much as the other 2 that we'll talk about in a minute. They're being sent to those places because there were adult leaders who discipled them. There were people within that church that poured into them, and we want them to replicate that and not just go, I'm just getting a job to go work back home in Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio. No, I'm going back sent. And this is a mechanism that I get to do. I get to go write code. That's a mechanism, but that's not my purpose. My purpose is to be sent. And so we want them to be all in church members. Secondly, is we're going to send them as part of a church planting pipeline. We desperately want to plant churches. Lord, by His grace, has helped us plant a few churches in really cool places. We are committed now to planting churches in college towns. Shameless plug, tomorrow morning at 8. We'll be talking more about that if you want to come to a breakfast at 8. But we get to plant, we want them to be a part of new gospel works in those places. So this past year, when Justin left to go to New City, he was our church planting resident. And when they planted New City in Austin, there was 7 to 10 students that had been meeting with Justin throughout the day, or throughout the year, that had said, no, I'm going to commit to going. And I'm going to go to Austin. I'm going to get a job in Austin, and I'm going to serve the campus and serve people. They wanted that. They want to be a part of something bigger. Are you putting that before them? That's the beauty of that. Are you putting that before them? And so that's part of our church plan. And finally is that they go to unreached people groups. And so we've got a whole thing. I can't talk about it today. I'd love to talk about more if you want to have a discussion about how we do that within our congregation. But there will be students who will say, you know what, I'm going to abandon this culture that I know and it's comfortable, and I'm going to embrace a new one. And we've got 48 goers that are on the field right now in various parts around the world that are reaching people, because in college, they just saw themselves as not consumers, but send people. And so this is not a program that we do, all right? This is a holistic approach and the way that we talk about and sacrifice and do things for that end. And so I hope that today, like as we land this thing, is that if you're to leave with anything, that you're to leave with senior sent, if we want the church to grow, if we want it to mature, if we want to see our ministries thrive with gospel proclamation, if we want to be a place where hurting and the broken and the wounded, then we're going to have to create it with intentionality. It's not just going to happen. It's not just going to go, all right, I'm just going to have a gathering, throw some worship music on, preach a sermon that's awesome, and that's going to do it. It's going to be created day in and day out through prayer, through leaning into shepherding and caring for students in one-on-one places. So that's it. It's not revolutionary, but I hope you take away. Are there any questions as we kind of land the plane? We got about 10-ish minutes left. Any questions? Comment? Any revelations, even in your own takeaways?
You said something that was, I think, really interesting. You said, when you talk about vision, you said that to retain, you'll need to sustain what attracts them. Mm-hmm. Maybe just any expansion on that.
Yeah. So if I'm to attract, what I attract with. So if I'm attracting with, whatever, free food, then if there's no other meat in that, if there's no other thing for them to grab onto, then I'm gonna have to keep being attracted with food. Or if I'm the guy who's gonna always have the coolest cutting edge sermons, I'm always gonna have to feel like, what's the new culture thing? And now, don't get me wrong, like those things are okay. But when those things precede and they can become very internal and very momentary. And so I wanna make sure that what I'm attracting them with is actually what I wanna see them strengthened in, right? So if I attract them with shallow Christianity with no Bible, and part of my, I'm going to preach a gospel that's got like a couple verses out of context, then I'm going to have to continue to do that at the kind of sacrifice of biblical literacy, which is one of our main points. We want our students to know the Bible. We want them to be able to read the Bible. And so that's why for us, when we preach sermons, like I'm going to attract them. Maybe it's not attractive. What's going to attract our students is exactly what Dean said last night. Most of our students came because somebody told them who told them, and they brought somebody. That's super attractional. More than me throwing on some big event every other week, spend a lot of money trying to get people there. If I'm going to bring them in with those, and we do a huge kickoff, we love that. Like we're going to pump money into that, but we're also going to pump money into fall retreat, because we feel like fall retreat is where students connect with each other. And so that's what I'm looking for. What's going to attract them is the relational component. That's what's going to sustain them there. And ultimately, that's what's going to strengthen them. Is our best students, like yesterday in that activity we did in the geographical cohort, like we were just kind of dialoguing as a team, and it was just like a revelation for all of us. We're like, everything in this top corner that's high cost and high impact, like we didn't have a lot to do with that. It was all students, just being students. So I hope that kind of answers it maybe a little bit.
What's it look like for you to equip students to disciple?
Yeah.
So is it, I disciple someone, then they pass that on? Do you have intentional meetings with everybody who's discipling? What does that look like?
Yeah, so that's a good question. That's kind of our theme for this next year is going to be equipping, because it's a space where we felt like some disconnect. Like we feel like we connect students really well. We feel like we've got ascending, at least the language and the culture for that. Equipping is one of those things where I think we're constantly going to be tweaking. Right now, here's what it looks like. We've got three student leader equippings on Sunday mornings that we do. We'll bring somebody in, whether that's mental health or how do I share the gospel or some theological issue, whatever it may be. Like we just want to equip them with something. And that's great. It's just kind of incomplete. The other aspect of that is we talk about multi-generational church. One of the greatest components for our student leaders is to be a student leader in Redeemer, you've got to be a member. And so we want them to buy into local church. They don't see it as, hey, they should do this or y'all should do this, but rather, hey, what can we do? It's like a we and mine, like there's some ownership. And so when they become a leader or even a lay, just a student who's coming, is we try to pair them with adult partners who are members. And so every student leader in this pipeline, whether they're a context leader, GC leader, senior team, they're going to meet with an adult once a week and just read the Bible. And so we, Sunday mornings look a lot like Tuesday nights, and that we're going to walk through. We just got done with Romans. We were in Romans for a year. And so those discipleship groups are going to look like, hey, let's open up the book of Romans. Let's talk about life. Where are you struggling in leadership? Where are you struggling personally with the gospel? Where's the gospel? And so that's kind of how the most of our equipping doesn't happen necessarily by our staff. It happens by our adult members that we've said, hey, you love college students. We're a college-focused church, not a college-centric church. Everything doesn't run around our college ministry. We want our adult members to wrap their arms around our college ministry and go, how do I get to breathe out what God's done for me? And so a lot of our adults have just said, hey, I want to host somebody, we want to host a GC in our home, or we want to lead a grow group with a couple students. And that's where, like when we've assessed at the end of the year, I'd be interesting to see, we've heard these stories of just like, man, this was the best year for me. Like my care coach was awesome, like just leaned in. And so that's a lot of where our discipleship happens, is kind of in that organic fashion. And that means I got to have trust in my adult partners 100%, and really do. God's been gracious in that. And so I think that's been a really cool aspect for discipleship. So, and equipping, yeah. Zach.
I have a background in high school ministry, and I
Yeah.
feel like high school seniors and college seniors, they'll say sometimes when they leave where they are to go to college, or after college when they move to a new city, like, I can't find something like the church I work at.
Yeah.
What do you say to that?
Yeah, it's 100%. I'm like, no, you're right. I mean, that's the thing, is like, and I think that's what Justin's point was, is like, you've got a great college ministry. And what's really hard is I've got great community. Like I've been praying hard for our seniors, because they've been the culture changers for us. They were like sophomores when I took on the full-time job, so they're really near to my heart. But they have great community. Like they just have really deep community. My fear is that they're going to go and try to duplicate that. In sending them, part of this stuff that we'll talk about with seniors in particular, and I'll talk about it from the stage and we'll put it into stuff that we print or whatever it may be, is like, you've got to recognize when you shift to that young adult, like things look different. And not feeling like, for me, because I mean, college, let's be honest, like for a lot of us is where college, like the gospel really like just gripped us, right? I was 21 when the Lord just opened my eyes, all this stuff I'd grown up in church, and that was it for me. And that we want that to not be the apex of their faith. But so I'm going to use words like, hey, this is a springboard for you, right? Like, no, it's not going to look the same, and that's okay. You're not going to gather every night and throw up movies on the tarp in your backyard. You know, you're not going to have that. That's okay. But what you do need to look at is what were the principles that helped you get there? Well, it was community. You need to go find community. It was a local church. You need to be involved in a local church. And so we want to give our seniors, there's a church in Bernie that one of our new student leaders came from. And he said when he graduated high school, they had like a list of churches that they loved and were kind of like-minded. And they just sat with their seniors and like, hey, let's just talk. You're going to tech. Here are several of the churches that are in Lubbock. These are the ones we feel like would be really helpful for you in the next phase. So we try to do that with our senior leaders. It's like, hey, where are you moving to? Hey, here are some cool churches that maybe you should check out. And then trust the Lord that that what took root here isn't gonna shrivel up when they go. So let me pray us out, and then you guys can be dismissed. You got about 15 minutes between the next breakout. So God, grateful today. Will you, by your grace, use things that were said, use thoughts that you provoked in minds to, God, do ultimately what we want to do, is equip the saints in the work of ministry, that they would see the gospel take root, that students would come to faith, be baptized, be sent, and that we would do that really intentionally, not just when they're seniors, but as a holistic approach to sending them well. So God, by your grace, will you do that in and through us? In Jesus' name, amen.